Hello, Asia, and hello, world. The shortage of ballot papers in the recently concluded elections in South Korea that has led to doubts in the electoral process, with people calling for a redo of the elections, puts a spotlight on the value of sufficient preparations and sound voter experience. Based on reports, at least 50 of 14,300 polling stations in South Korea ran out of ballots, and voting was temporarily suspended in 22 polling stations due to delays in receiving election supplies. There were reported instances where voters waited for hours into the night to cast ballots after polls officially closed at 6 p.m. The head of the National Election Commission said it only printed ballot papers for 73% of the total eligible voters based on the previous election turnouts. The NEC has since resigned, with President Lee Jae-myung saying that there will be an overhaul of the election process after the ballot paper shortage incident. Similar and parallel incidents in elections in Asia have been unfortunately observed that have raised doubts about the integrity of the electoral process and contributed to voter disenfranchisement. These issues include delays in the delivery of election paraphernalia, poor queue management, malfunctioning vote counting machines where electronic voting systems are in place, accessibility issues of polling stations, and ballot secrecy concerns. In Nepal, for example, persons with disability and elderly voters face significant barriers, raising concerns about limited public transportation on election day and the absence of dedicated, accessible voting arrangements. Many polling stations in the country during the last elections were located in schools or public buildings situated in hilly or areas with uneven ground, which presented inherited logistical challenges for fully barrier free access. In general, accessibility of polling stations has been a recurring issue in elections in Asia. In the Philippines, meanwhile, while lessons from previous election cycles have led to administrative and procedural reforms and accommodations for vulnerable sectors, delays in the opening of polling stations, and poor queue management have led to overcrowding, long queues, and voter frustration during the 2025 midterm elections. While risk mitigation measures in place have significantly improved issues with vote counting machines that underscored the 2022 elections, there were still some reports of malfunctioning VCMs in the last elections. Another significant concern observed in several elections in Asia is ballot secrecy. During the 2024 elections in Indonesia, several instances that compromised confidentiality of the vote were observed. Some polling stations lacked sufficient cover, affecting the voters' ability to maintain secrecy when casting their ballots. In Sri Lanka, the secrecy of the ballot was compromised due to the booth being visible to the senior polling officers and other polling staff. In this episode of the Election Observer podcast, we'll discuss the importance of sufficient preparations and considerable accommodations in improving the voters' experience on election day towards public confidence building and trust in the electoral process. I'm your host, John Antiquera, and we are live via ANFREL's Facebook and LinkedIn pages, as well as via ANFREL's YouTube channel. The episodes of the Election Observer podcast can also be streamed later on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. With us today are I are with us today are Aishat Rizna, the Executive Director of Transparency Maldives, and Heroic Motakin Pratama, the Executive Director of Perkumpulan untuk Pamiludan Demokrasi or Perludem from Indonesia. Hello, Rizna and Heroic. Welcome to the Election Observer podcast.
Hi John, hi Rizna, how are you?
We're good. How are you, Rizna? I think you are muted. We can't
Yeah,
hear you. You are muted right now. Or there's no audio. You are not muted, but there's no audio coming from your side. Before we start, can you just check first so that we can hear you throughout the show? We still cannot hear you right now. I would suggest that you um, leave and then rejoin, maybe that could work. Technical difficulties, no, this is what happens when the shows are live, right? Heroic.
Yeah.
Back to the Election Observer podcast. This is your second episode with us.
Yeah, it's my second episode. Thanks, John.
Yes, I saw as well that you had a discussion earlier. So
Yeah,
you also did a discussion earlier, no? I was
yeah.
worried that you won't be able to join because you were live. But thank you for joining us, though. Let's wait first for um,
For sure, John. Thanks.
Rizna. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
guess just so that there's no dead air. Oh, she joined. Let's see. Hello, Rizna.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can
Yay.
hear you now. Okay, let's
Okay.
get on with the show now. For the
Okay.
Election Observer podcast, we of course try to provide a holistic insight of the elections overall, looking at civil society engagement, inclusion, citizen participation, and empowerment, among many other topics that we have discussed previously. I think this is the first time that we're focused on the voter experience per se, and on the electoral process on election day, specifically. So for my first question, while of course organizations like us look at elections and evaluate elections based on the overall assessment, the various aspects of the system and the process, a voter's perception, of course, of the electoral process could be heavily influenced by their experience on election day. So, for my first question, in your observation of elections, what do you think have been key concerns of voters that have remained unaddressed or underappreciated? Anyone can go first.
Okay.
Okay.
So, should I start, Heroic?
Yes, Rizna, go
Yeah,
ahead.
yes, please. Yes.
Okay, I will share our experiences from the recently held elections, but these are concerns and issues that have remained over the years. Um, Unfortunately, compared to previous elections, where Maldives election administration body does a very good job on the day and there's very smooth processes. This time, because we also conducted three concurrent elections on the same day, it was a bit overwhelming, I think, for the election administrative body as well as for the voters. So the experience turned out to be a bit challenging as well as inconvenient, and largely these are due to the reasons that could be avoided in future elections through better planning, for instance in selection of polling stations, as well as how centers are organized. Usually, as you have also mentioned, John, usually government officers, schools, and many other public buildings are used for election voting day. So, in order to ensure accessibility and many other things, similarly, available government buildings were allocated. But however, in this election, we also saw certain, makeshift type of tents which were placed in large stadiums or football grounds, and it's not an issue of makeshift tents per se. These were they attempted to provide well lit and ventilated air conditioned conditions, but too many ballot boxes were placed in these tents, which led to overcrowding, and the elections were also conducted at a time when there was a severe heat wave here, which
Mhm.
eventually led to discomfort and some voters facing medical issues also. So these are some of the election day issues that we saw in the last one also. So as a result of long queues and long waiting times and adequate seating and other arrangements not being provided, it caused less of a pleasant experience for voters. In Maldives, voters come out in great numbers because they are very excited and they want to really be part of the democratic process. I will stop here and let Heroic continue on other issues. I'm sure there'll be many other that I can also jump to later on.
Yeah, thank
Sure.
you, Rizna. Yeah, John, of course. Yeah, there is several factors if we see that why voters they remain unaddressed or underappreciated. First, we can identify. First is about the information gaps on
Mhm,
during the voting days. You know what? Sometimes voters frequently arrive at the polling stations is uncertain.
mhm,
So as we know also, every elections we have the different demography of voters. It's early voters, elderly, or marginalized group. But in the same time, uh, for every election, sometimes they have different regulations during the or
mhm,
procedure during the election. So what make the voter unaddressed or appreciated sometimes they not receive good enough or full enough information from the elections commissions if there is some adjustments or there is some new regulations during voting days. We ever have experience in 2009 elections in Indonesia. There is a changing about the mechanism of casting of the ballots. Usually we use a nail to cast the ballot, but in 2009 we use a pen to give a
mhm.
tick box. So you know what? During the elections, more than if I'm not mistaken, more than 10 millions vote is invalid because there
Oh.
is the difference of voting method in 2009.
Mhm,
In previous elections since 2019 and also in 2024, Indonesia conducts simultaneous elections.
mhm,
During the 40 days, voters receive five different ballots: presidentials, uh, house of representative in national level, in provincial levels, and also in municipal regency, including the Senate. Since 2009, there is an increasing number invalid votes in Indonesia because voter mostly only focus on presidential ballots. They not cast the ballot for the legislative elections because we're using the open list proportional. So in previous election we have 18 political party participant. So after 18 political participant can register every each candidate. So you can imagine a lot of name inside the ballot paper. We have a big size of a ballot paper like a newspaper. So sometimes it confused. So we need more effort from the election commission to give some voter educations, informations to voters. So when they come to the voting day, so they have enough information to about the procedure and also about the mechanism on the casting of the ballot. This is one of the factor I think that why
yeah.
voters can still underrated or appreciated. Second is of course about the treatment by poll worker itself. You know what? Sometimes to be a voters to deliver your votes on the polling booth, some country of course need some place some requirement. You need bring
Mhm,
voter IDs or you need bring the citizen IDs, for example. Uh, in Indonesia, for example, since 2019, who eligible to give their vote during the voting days is only for voter who have electronic single identity ID. So if they don't have, so it's not eligible. Even though there is a new constitutional decree, because there is some problems there. Not only not full Indonesian populations has registered to the identity as a single identity. So, but when they come, even though they on the list of the voters, but they not bring the voter ID, but they bring another ID, for example, drive license, for example, or another identity that prove about their citizens and their eligible voters. Sometimes poll workers not allow to them to give their votes, even though inside the voter registration. So the treatments by poll workers also I think is one of the big impact related to unaddressers or underappreciated voters during the voting day. And lastly, of course, based on experience that you explained in South Korea related with the ballot shortage and also the long queue management, it also impactful to make voters bored, and also yeah, I think they wasting a lot of time to give their vote. So it also make voters unaddressed. For example, long queue disproportionality affect working voters, and also uh, it it is important for elections commissions to create some minimum or maximum voters in every polling stations to minimize the long queue for voters. In Indonesia, for example, again, for simultaneous elections, the maximum is 300 voters for every polling stations. But when it become local head elections, because there's only two ballots for governor and also for mayor, the numbers of voters in every each polling station can be increased to so it not affect to the long queue of waiting voter. So I think there are three factors that impact of unaddressed or underappreciated voter during the voting days. John.
Mm. Actually, when Rizna mentioned about the simultaneous election, I immediately thought
Yeah.
of the case in Indonesia and also the case in the Philippines where I'm
Yeah.
from, because we hold simultaneous elections as well, and it is quite complicated for voters.
Yeah.
Especially as Heroic has said, voters receive at 5 ballot
Five
papers,
ballots. Yeah.
and I saw those ballot papers. They're quite huge, and that can also affect, of course, how voters appreciate the experience as well. No, and I it's also quite unique in Indonesia, the using of the
Yeah.
nail to cast the
Nail.
ballot. That's also quite
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
something to note. No, but you've also mentioned, Rizna, and this is just a follow up to the question, because you've mentioned also about the experience of heat wave during the election. I remember in when we observed the elections in Indonesia in 2024, there were also instances where elections had to be postponed in some polling stations because of the flooding and raining and
Yeah.
flooding. Um, I just wanted to know, of course, now climate change affects not just elections, but every aspect of our lives. What do you think would be um, a good measure to mitigate such risks? Because it could affect voting for, not just the experience, but voting itself could affect voting for voters. How do you think EMB should prepare for such instances?
Yeah, that is actually my point because March and April is like the hottest, warmest time in the Maldivian, when it comes to the weather and everything. So it the Elections Commission and all the related authorities were well aware that we are in a period of this kind of weather and climate conditions, but unfortunately, adequate preparations were not done. That is the whole issue. Because even though we are using schools or public buildings or other government offices, not all the queues and not all the lining up is inside shaded areas. So that also meant people had to stay outside much longer. Very basic things as chairs to sit for the long queues, drinking water, and bathroom facilities and others can. These are like simple things that can really enhance the experience of voters. Unfortunately, that fell short this time, despite the efforts, I would say. And just relating to unlike Indonesia and Philippines, this was the first time Maldives had three elections on the same day. So it was quite a new experience for us. Yes, in the past, for the local elections, we always have two votes, one for the Women's Development Committees and the local council elections, which were not that complicated. And also among all the elections we have, it was a less popular, like vote for the voters also. So the turnout and everything was much less. But because we were also doing a national referendum for the very first time since like 2007, after our democratic, process, constitution and everything. So a lot more people came out to vote in the referendum actually. So when you are coming out to vote and you're standing in the queue, because it was managed by the same process, same or infrastructure and authorities, it was single vote basically. Like you queue up once and identity check is done once, and you cast your vote. I mean, three ballots at the same time. So that also, I think, overwhelmed the authorities. They did not anticipate. And one of the reasons cited for the last minute change in the polling hours was the heat wave also. Now, going back to my point, like we knew when we went for voting day also, it's going to be extremely hot. It's going to be extremely, difficult for people to voters to come out in midday to vote. So we can, prepare and like plan to have long hours in the later part of the day, for instance, when it's less warm. So those kind of things fell short. So I feel like, it could be enhanced and improved for the voters also. And of course, every voter will take more time casting their vote, because, you're voting for three. And this is also related to the information deficit Heroic mentioned, because voters are not well aware and well educated on what's a valid or an invalid vote. That also takes a lot more time for each
Yeah.
person. That is leading to longer queues. And in the Maldivian elections, the referendum was added as a last minute, addition to the elections that were being already set for a particular date. So everything related to the referendum had the minimum requirement provided in the law, whether it was re-registration, or voter education or campaign period, or everything was like to the minimum in the law. Like when you come for a national referendum, if you have the maximum benefit or the maximum period, you organizations like us also, we can educate the public better, do more public awareness with the communities and young people and others. So those were factors that could have really changed the experience, I would say.
Yeah. How about you, Heroic? When
Yeah, there is some.
because yes, go ahead.
No, no, no. You had another questions.
No, no, no. I just wanted to share the experience in Indonesia, because I know in the
Okay.
opening, when we did the opening, it was raining really hard. And
Yeah,
it was quite an
yeah.
experience that the opening was delayed because of that. And as I've said earlier, we heard, of course, news that in some polling stations, because of the flooding, they had to
Betul.
stop the
Yes.
voting process.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, John. You know what? In Indonesia, the constitutions and also the elections law note specific mentions about the date or the day of voting day should be held by the elections commissions. So it depends on the elections commission itself to regulate and also to decide when the voting day will be held in Indonesia. The constitution just only mentions about the term of the presidentials and also mention just only the elections must be conduct regularly 5 years, something like that. So what of the interesting part is we know Indonesia we have the rainy seasons, the big rainy seasons,
Mhm.
because we are in tropical country, right? Uh, During the start from, if I'm not mistake, October's, February until April, and still from November until February, it's the rainy seasons. It's the rainy seasons. When That's why when the elections commissions in Indonesia decide to conduct to hold the voting days in 14 February, with we call it as the Valentine's Day also,
Yes.
and it will be more challenges to distribute the logistic of the elections, and also it will be affect of voters to come the polling stations. And you see it, you saw it during the observations in Indonesia for several provinces in Sumatra and several provinces in outside Java Island. There is a flood there that affect to postponing the voting days. So that's why during when KPU uh, create some regulations on the voting procedure and decide when the voting days, a lot of civil society group, including Perludem in Indonesia,
Mm,
we propose to please do not hold voting day on February. Maybe
mm,
you can conduct voting day on April because it more become more summer sighting something like that. So it
mm,
more be smooth for voters to come to the polling stations and also for the distributions of the logistic. And uh, the distributions of the logistics in Indonesia, you cannot imagine because we are the archipelago countries, a lot of small islands in Indonesia that cannot distribute by uh, by by cars something like that. You need
mm.
to come more with plane or helicopter something like that, to
Oh,
remote area to distribute the remote area. But you can imagine when the rainy season,
yes.
so it could be more difficult. So that's why now during because in Indonesia now there is some discussions to revise the elections law. We need
Mhm,
to more specify, make some criteria before the KPU or the elections commissions decides when the voting day will be held.
mm. Now, related to, accessibility of polling
Yeah.
stations, of course, there have been issues about related to accessibility of these of where elections are being conducted. It has been a general concern in many elections that have been observed in Asia. But one particular aspect that leads to this concern is, of course, the selection of polling stations. Probably to some extent, since most of these locations are public facilities like schools and town halls, you can also attribute it to building code standards. Of course, that's one factor. And of course, building new locations would be very difficult and costly if you're considering that. But what have been like the barriers in selecting better polling stations? Because this is something that is not this is something that doesn't happen in just one election. It continues to happen in many elections,
Yeah.
right? So like how could election management bodies select better polling stations that are more accessible to particular voting sectors? And have there been, if you have observed in your own country, have there been some good alternative mechanisms to improve accessibility? Yes, Rizna, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Yeah. Of course, John.
election for every election, the state provides all of its resources to the election management body, right? Which means whatever the state resources are available in terms of location, accessibility, and other things are at the disposal of the elections commission. So I would think, like, better, like, once you know the total voters who will be voting in a particular geographical location or a city or an island, then the next task or what needs to be done is to check what are the available facilities and how much, a proper survey can really identify where the ballot boxes needs to be placed. And yes, our building codes are not fully accessibility compliant and everything, but in every city or in every island or place, the recent buildings or the newer buildings that have been, in place, that are in place, has more accessibility facilities also, which means that if the EC or the election body surveys well, a lot of these can also be avoided. For example, in one of the stations that I was observing this time, it was a school. The school had a lift also, but despite that, they only used the first floor. If there's a lift, you could use the higher floors also, meaning you can reduce the number of, like, voters, or per box that is placed in every floor, or every classroom, by giving more seating space and other things, and also like proper ventilation and like other facilities can be organized. So as much as the elections commission tried to find places in the ground floor and more accessible, there were still challenges. Like, for instance, using preschool classrooms are very cramped and very, very small, because
Yeah.
the size of those schools are that. So even if the EC provides a ramp or something for those with physical disability, the school grounds may not even be properly paved, and there might be, like, sand or things that can really again cause another issue, even if there is a ramp. So very small things can go a long way, I would say, in making it more accessible. Yes, making new buildings or building new places just for polling is not a solution or a sustainable way, also, in my opinion. But in a city, like, for instance, like in bigger cities, I'm sure, like, with adequate planning and really surveying, some of these can really be overcome and to provide a better experience, because different age groups and different people will come to vote, and it's not only those in wheelchair or limited mobility who has issues. The elderly, or, like, the pregnant, or many other people can have these kind of difficulties in standing for a long time in the queue and other things. So it's just, yes, they do give preferential treatment for any voter who needs assistance, or who needs, like, to vote and leave early, or people in, like, there are many good arrangements done to ensure that everyone gets to vote in an easier way, like uniform bodies, or people on duty, or people, doctors and medical professionals. They are given, like, preference in the voting queue as well. So a lot of good things are done, but these little small things, if it is like paid more attention, definitely
Yes.
the experience can be better.
Heroic.
Yeah, related with the accessibility issues about the polling stations, of course, it's become a general concern in many elections in many countries also, especially
Mhm.
for people with disability to access the polling stations, like Rizna mentioned. But you know what? Once a venue is established as a polling stations, sometimes it's become a default on in subsequent elections for the upcoming.
Yes.
So the place and also the buildings also always there to be part of to be as a polling stations. I think it's because maybe the elections commissions considers about the administrative effort, the budget, and also sometimes community opposition when a familiar location is displaced or changed. I think every elections commission has have guidance how to create accessibility during the polling
Mhm.
session. But in reality, in fact, in and on the field, it's not easy like on the guidance. For Indonesian context, every polling stations it's for how to say, like not sub district, under village we have some the community uh, groups. We call it the how to say airway in Indonesia is like in one community group more than 15 or some people to inside that. So there is one polling stations there, but about public facilities not always there. So
Mhm.
sometimes they use a road to create a polling stations, because every polling station was have a budget. It's around 15 or $20 in Indonesia to build polling stations. And another thing I think is about the cost and security requirement. You know, a venue of polling stations must also meet a basic security standard. it need to be large enough, have adequate lighting, be lockable overnight because the distributions of logistics like ballot paper, ballot box, and so on always distribute at night before
Mhm.
voting day, right? So it should be lockable for vote storage, and there is accessible also for security personnel. This
Mhm.
particular requirement for the narrow the pool, it's not always easy to find the place that meet the requirement. Just like I mentioned in Indonesia, sometimes in the street they build polling station, so the logistic of voting day sometimes they place on the head of village, something like that, or near on the something like that. So under this situation, so one of the interesting part, I think, some elections commission based on my literate review to see what experience in other country. There is three recommendation that make more polling stations more accessible before they build polling station. First is the mandatory pre-election accessibility audit with a
Mhm.
standard checklist like physical access, sign, lighting, queue management, and also restroom access, for example, and
Yes.
also can create objective ground for replacing poor locations. Second is broader venue eligibility criteria that allow private venues, not always in public space, for example, not always in school, but also we can maybe in private venues like shopping malls in their park area, something like that. So we can create also polling stations. Because in Indonesia, John, maybe if after the voting cast the ballot, there is ink inside their finger. So when they come
Yes.
to the shopping area, they can show it, and you will receive a
Ah,
discount, right? So it
yes.
also create more. I think it also can make increasing voter participations.
Mhm.
And lastly, I think about we can use the technology, GIS
Mhm.
based stations placement analysis. So we can identify communities that are systematically under reserved or existing locations, allowing targeted improvement before complaints arise. So I think those three one also become some recommendation to uh, create more accessibility for polling stations.
Mm. I also just wanted to add to what you said, no. Although I appreciate the suggestion about the accessibility audit is actually good. I was just thinking that, that could be part of the administrative work of polling officers, but then that would also already add to their work. But then maybe the election
Yeah,
commission could consider doing it some other time. Because
yeah,
I know in Indonesia there have been news of, polling officers dying from overwork as well, right? Um,
yeah,
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 but
yeah.
just to add also to your
More
suggestion to
than
the mall,
800 poll workers.
yeah, but just to also add to your suggestion about the mall, this is actually something that the Philippines is already doing. They've pilot tested
Mm,
in several locations having polling stations in malls because our national and local elections happen. I think, if I'm not mistaken, every second Monday of May. It's in the Constitution, so there's no way of changing it unless you change the constitutional provision. So it's
mm,
always the hottest time of the year. So to address that particular concern, our election commission has provided several accommodation by setting up polling stations in several malls around the country. The Philippines likes malls. So that's a win-win for voters, of course, and the election management body.
When you have space, that's an option. Like in a small place like Maldives, like the capital Male, we don't have like big indoor places like air conditioned malls and places. So the schools
Mm,
are the best options or government
options.
buildings. Yeah, university maybe.
And you hope that the government would provide air conditioning to the classrooms as well, right? So
Yeah.
that
So
it's not just about the voters, it's also about the students as well, right?
yeah, so it's a recent initiative, like all government schools are now air conditioned, I think, since the last 2 years. So this time everyone thought, like, despite the heat, it will be pleasant, but you get the air condition only when you reach the classroom.
And you
So to
go
reach the
inside.
classroom, you're still in a queue, right?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But it also depends on what time of the day you are voting. Like
That's true.
I, for instance, went in the afternoon at the very, like, the hottest time, so there was no queue. But also,
Uh-huh.
like, towards the closing, there are more people, like, those undecided voters or various other people. They would probably come at the very, last part of the day.
Last part. Oh.
Yeah.
Just before we close this part, no, just to share a personal experience, because for us in our family, we actually go in the afternoon because people usually go in the morning to vote. Because people really like to vote in the
Yeah, yeah,
Philippines, are
yeah.
excited to vote. So there are less people in the afternoon. So even if it's hot, you don't wait for quite a long time. So that's what we usually do in our family when we vote. When we go out to vote, we go in the afternoon. I guess it's different for every country as well, no?
Is it very family gathering type of day, like voting day? So you are joined in Philippines because in world it's like at least where we live currently, like in the capital, because people have moved and migrated so much. Voting day is a day to connect with your old neighbors and people who, because we vote based on our permanent residence. So
Yes.
that day you meet like your old school people, neighbors,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
reconnect with family. So it's a very, like, nice experience in a way.
Yeah.
Is it the same?
It's the same. Most likely, the people that you are voting in the same polling station are your neighbors, the
Yeah,
people you already know. It's also a way to
yeah,
connect to people, right?
yeah.
Yes. So just for my next question, no, of course, one of the things that I've mentioned earlier is about the compromised ballot secrecy, which also again is something that's very common. Unfortunately and unintentionally, I would assume that it's not intentional that polling stations are designed to
Yeah.
compromise the ballot secrecy, but it happens, and it's something that I think could be avoided. No, but unintentional as they are, it's unfortunate, of course, that it still happens, and it's very important electoral standard that the secrecy of the vote is respected, and yet observers continue to raise such concerns. What have been, do you think, the contributing factors observed that put into question the secrecy of the ballot, and what are the good examples of how ballot secrecy is protected that could be implemented in other jurisdictions?
Yeah. First, I think about the booth design. Yeah, sometimes there is no standardized the booth designs for voters to vote to cast their ballots. Booths sometimes they booths that are too low or too narrow or improperly positioned, such as the poll worker standing nearby can see the ballot. So also the witnesses so can see the ballot. So I think one of the common issues that unintentionally violate the secrecy of the ballot is about the booth designs. Second, I think also it's contributed by the overcrowded stations, the polling
Mm,
stations. So if the polling station is overcrowded, so many voters come at the same time, for example, but at the same time the polling stations not too large, uh, so everyone will be around the polling station, so everyone can see, even though there is a voting booth, but everyone can see about when who they cast the ballot during the voters. And another thing I think is about, maybe even though mostly common in Indonesia it's unintentional, even though some province, because there is some provisions for in Indonesia for indigenous people.
Mhm.
We call it how to say uh, uh, so they can some proxy voting
Mm.
for the uh, the the chief of indigenous people. So the secrecy of course is violated, but the constitutional court allow it because it's
Mhm.
part of the traditions. So
Mm.
it also happens in Indonesia, especially in Papua, New Guinea. We call it noken. Noken, it's mean like a bag, the traditional
Mm.
bag. It usually used to bring something, stuff or goods, but it used to bring the ballot paper. So the
Mm.
mechanism, the voters delegate the rights to the chief of indigenous to cast the ballot. So I think uh, it's part of the social or culture in particular countries such as in Indonesia. So under these situations, I think so we need to make some standardized the polling booth. Of course, because if the elections commissions can create some standardized, and also even though the productions it's by the local authority, for example, but
Mhm.
the elections in central office so make some a guidance, so we will to ensure the secrecy of the voting process. I think that's all for my side too.
Yes. How about you, Brisna?
Yeah, in addition to the physical, layout and the issues around ballot secrecy, there's also another issue that we face here, in especially in the local elections, because our islands are very small and the voting population uh, based outside in different, like industrial zones or other types of places where ballot boxes are placed, due to which their ballot secrecy is not really guaranteed. And usually what the practice is, or the procedure followed by the elections commission is, they will identify who are the voters whose ballot secrecy cannot be ensured due to the registration to the boxes that they have carried out. So they give a extra opportunity for those voters to re-register, but unfortunately sometimes the re-registration period is very very short, which does not
Mhm.
really provide them an opportunity to properly register them to a box where their ballot secrecy can be ensured. In the last elections, they gave around 48 hours, and everything is done online now. So
Mhm.
people with, like limited internet access, or people working in various shift duties and other things, face challenges in order to like meet that deadline and register to a box where their ballot can be really ensured secrecy. So around 6,000 voters were affected by this in the last elections also, which is quite a worrying issue, because it's a constitutional requirement also to safeguard the ballot secrecy, and to ensure everyone is able to freely cast their vote. Yes, the physical setup or the layout of the polling station also contributes to this issue. Sometimes, like smaller polling stations, or the layout is, I mean, it's a standard layout, but you can only prepare the layout within the available space in the particular school or classroom or hall or anywhere that the center is based. So because of which also, despite the screen and everything, sometimes the officials or observers or those in queue have encountered this, and some disagreements, as well as bit of loud exchanges and verbal exchanges did happen in the last election also, and they eventually changed the layout of that particular polling station, and then they continued the vote, because people, I mean, the voters did not allow them to really go ahead the way it was set up, because it was being visible for the people in the queue and other areas. And this is an issue because the kind of influence and abused on many different levels also affect individual choices, like your employment, your family relations, or your future, political other aspirations are affected by how you vote. So no one wants to really disclose it in a way that can affect them, and that is why it becomes such a huge issue and lead into a disagreement. And in fact, voting was discontinued in some stations, due to which it interrupted voting also in the last elections based on the physical layout alone.
Mhm. I just also wanted to add to this because I think there also needs to be a balancing of protecting the secrecy of the ballot and also protecting, of course, the process itself. Because in
Mm,
some elections, you have observed, polling officers that are quite close to the polling booth. I
yeah,
think the intention is to really to just to see that the process is well maintained. And in one example in Nepal, for example, because of the situation with the security, in each of the polling station, there was an armed police officer that was near the polling booth. So that raises a concern, but you also understand where it comes from. It's just that I think there also needs to be a balance in terms of security and protecting the process and also protecting the secrecy of the ballot. That it doesn't cross lines. You understand, of course, there are a lot of different factors in elections that needs to be considered, but that there also they need to find a balance in terms of, not
yeah,
compromising the other over the other one, right? Um, I am aware of time, so we are on our fourth question. I'm not sure if I can still ask my last question, but for my next question, referring, of course, to the explanation of the election management body in South Korea, to the recent ballot paper shortage incident in the local elections, it sounds plausible, of course, to have prepared as many ballot papers based on previous turnout trends. But to some extent, however, you can see where many voters are coming from when they have raised doubts about the process because of what they experienced. In your engagement with election management bodies in your country, what have been good practices or even best practices in EMB preparation for the elections and accountability measures when they fall short of what is expected of them? Best
yeah,
practices.
yeah, John. If I'm not mistake, the South Korea, they produce the ballot paper based on the turnout of the previous elections, right? Uh,
Yes.
60% or 70%, if I'm not mistake.
73%.
70%. So I
Yes.
think US, the elections commissions, even though I don't know it's regulated in the under the elections law or the constitution in South
Mhm.
Korea or not, I'm not sure about that. But in my opinion, as the elections commissions, you cannot produce the ballot paper based on turnout on your previous elections. You
Mhm.
need to produce the ballot paper based on voter registrations, the number of voter registrations, because every voter has a right to vote.
Mhm.
Even though, for example, in Indonesia, voting rights in Indonesia is voluntary, not compulsory like in Australia. So, if compulsory, maybe you can produce your ballot paper based on voter who register as a vote for the upcoming elections. But for the country like Indonesia and other country who give right to vote as a voluntary right, so the elections commissions you need to prepare the whole ballot for every citizen who eligible as a voter. I think it's my first answer related with how the preparations of the elections commissions accountability measures related with the logistic of the elections.
Mhm.
Second, based on our experience and our regulations, even though in Indonesia the number of uh, uh, to produce the number of ballot paper based on the voter registration, but our regulations mandatory at 2.5%. as another ballot paper if there is some broken ballot paper, so you can use another ballot paper for each polling stations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there is a backup.
Yeah.
There is a backup for a broken ballot paper, so you can replace it. So I think it's also a good experience based on
Mm-hmm.
our experience in Indonesia. Even though you prepare a whole ballot paper for every each voter registration, but we also add 2.5% from the total of voters in every polling stations as a backup for voter if there a mistake to cast the ballot or the ballot has broken, so you can change the ballot paper. But of course there is a consequences
Yes.
about the budget, right? So you need to consider about the budget when you produce uh, ballot paper for each polling stations. And the third things, I think you need to decentralize the
Mm-hmm.
productions of ballot paper. Even though the EMBs has authority in central office to produce the ballot paper, but for country with different islands or archipelago like Indonesia, so you need decentralize the productions to the local officers on the local elections commissions. So you can distribute the logistic of the elections right time. No. So there is no delay to distributions of the ballot. I think this is one also. Another thing is of course the use of the elections technology. Even though the use of election technology it's depends on the needs and also depends on what circumstances that you face on the elections. It also become one of the solutions to use the technology to control the distributions of the ballot. In uh, the elections commissions in Indonesia, they use the information system. The name is the distribution logistic information system. So
Mm-hmm.
the central elections commission can monitor the distributions of every each logistic to every city or regency, and city regency can also control the distributions to every polling stations in Indonesia. I think
Chris,
that's
yeah.
my point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If I want to add something, I mean, just to what, I mean, an additional point would be, I think voters registry is like the, I think, main thing that should be used in terms of ballot printing as well as preparations for the number of people who we expect to vote in that election, not really based on the voter turnout for the last many elections also. If for instance, as I said earlier, the local council elections are very not one of the most popular elections here, but because we had the referendum, we had a very high turnout this time. So
Mm-hmm.
if we use that methodology, then definitely this issue, similar to South Korea, would have surfaced here as well. But the practice in the Maldivian context by the Elections Commission is that the total number of voters registered to vote plus a buffer is there in terms of printing ballot papers. So there is a buffer stock. And because like voting is also the vote is counted at the station, everything is tallied in front of like citizen observers, other party officials, and candidate representatives. So there is no issue by virtue of printing extra ballot papers. It's only kept as a sort of a contingency or something that will be used in case where it is required. But it's very important to, I think, keep those things, and if something of that nature happens, then yes, definitely the accountability part also comes into play. for any elections commission, I think it's very important to acknowledge it publicly as well as include transparency elements in it. Usually in the Maldives, the EMB publishes and informs about the procurement process, who is
Mhm.
printing the ballot paper, where it was printed, how much it was printed, how much was dispatched, and many of these details are publicly shared. So the oversight part can be carried out by people like us and other civil society, as well as those who want to observe these issues. So in terms of, like, these kind of, I think information sharing is very important when it comes to
Yes.
this kind of administrative arrangements, so that, like, at least that confidence is there with the EMB that they have done this, they have carried out this process properly, I would say.
Mhm. Yes, thank you for pointing out about transparency and particularly about procurement process. Actually, that's a good point, though, because if they were transparent about it, people would have known that they did not print enough ballots.
Yeah. And not end up in lines to vote and realize there's no ballot paper, right?
And also, it was quite when I read about this news, I was like, many of the elections that we observe, many of them prepare extra ballots. And this is I think, the first time that I've heard that they prepared ballots based on trends of previous elections. So it came back to them. Although, in fairness to the election commission head, at least, um, he took accountability and resigned
Yeah,
somehow.
yeah.
There is some accountability there. But
I think
yeah,
that's
it
very
was,
important also, right? I mean, to take accountability, and if there are shortcomings, and to show that, you did not do your part, or you failed to do your part properly.
yeah. That's very true. So just for my last question, because I really wanted to ask this in previous episodes, because we ran out of time, I don't get to ask this question. No, um, I don't know if you've seen our video about holding an election. As I said in the video, I say in the video, ANFREL is holding an election because we wanted to know what motivates what motivates people to participate and engage in the election. So we have been asking we've released some videos about this to complete a particular sentence, which is, I vote for blank. So to complete the sentence, we wanted to ask you what motivates you to engage and participate in elections by completing the sentence, I vote for blank. Just for an example, some have said there's one particular answer. This I always set this as an example because she said, I vote for better infrastructure because in the Philippines we have poor infrastructure and people don't have time to spend with their families because they're stuck in traffic. Some have given answers like citizen observer rights. So it can range from very concrete examples to, um, examples such as citizen observer rights. So I ask again, to complete the sentence for you, what motivates you to participate in elections? Can you can you complete the sentence? I vote for blank. Who would like to go first? I know, Rizla, you have answered
Yes, ma'am.
this because
Yeah,
you were,
when we did the
but we did.
STO, yeah, I can answer again.
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, so basically, I vote for to bring my voice out in the elections, so that, irrespective of who is chosen or which candidate is selected, I have, used my voice, and I have participated in the democratic process. And I believe that by voting, I get to decide these things, and not voting is not equivalent to, a voice in that aspect. But I definitely would like to see where everyone's voice matters in elections. So that is why I'll vote.
Okay. How about
Yeah.
you, Heroic?
I vote because I'm using my right as a citizen to elect my representative in the legislative or in presidential. I vote also to protecting my right to not receive officials to lead our countries. So I vote to protecting our rights to give a better life and also to get a better democracy and also to protecting our democracy because vote is one of main requirement if you have a democracy, so you need to vote.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
Very
you,
nice.
Rizna and Heroic, for joining us today. I would have to remove you from the feed, but thank you for accepting our invitation to be part of this particular episode. And I appreciate all the insights that you've shared today. So thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
us,
John.
John. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Of course, of
Rizna.
course. Next time, I hope, no? One more time. Okay, I'll have to remove you from the feed for me to formally close the show. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. Yes, and that has been the Election Observer podcast on the importance of course, sufficient preparations and considerable preparation to the needs of different electoral stakeholders to improve voters' experience on election day towards building public trust and public confidence on the electoral process. Um, get the latest news and updates about ANFREL programs and activities to our Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok pages. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and WhatsApp channels. Please follow the Election Observer podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I hope we get new subscribers after this episode. No? Thank you again for joining us today. I'm your host, John Antiquera. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.